Hello and welcome to another high-flying, rim-rocking episode of Zilog and Moto. Okay, yeah, that's probably a bit much, but hey, it's the intro where you really have to grab life by the lips and yank as hard as you can to grab those viewers. $1 to Weird Al Yankovic. Anyway, my name is Dave, and as stated, this is the Zilog and Moto channel, which is dedicated to the singular mission of collecting and performing in-depth reviews on any English-language game that can be played in and around a Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, whether that's a native 16-bit title or a Master System game with a power-based converter, a Sega CD game, or a 32X title. Also, this channel is guaranteed to have 100% less Michael Richards than UHF, that is, unless he managed to sneak a cameo in a Corpse Killer and I'm not aware of it. Each week, more or less, for the last 3.5 years, I've been grinding out these reviews, and so far I've made my way through not quite an eighth of those libraries, and I'm pretty proud of that. This project has taken up a lot of time and effort, but at the same time it's incredibly rewarding, especially every time I upload a new video and the channel numbers get that little bump in views from new content. I really like the idea that there's people out there that aren't just watching these videos, but also enjoying them or getting valuable information about the games that make up these libraries. And make no mistake, the games, good and bad, are the star of this channel, not me. I'm just here to present them and try to keep their memory alive one more day. If all that sounds interesting, I'd recommend that you think about subscribing to the channel, because it'll help you know when new videos are uploaded, and other people might possibly be introduced to the channel as well. As far as today's video goes, well, recently there's been a lot of non-Genesis content on the channel. Not for any particular reason, but just due to the way that the schedule has gone over the last few weeks. This week I didn't have anything penciled in due to the previous episodes, so I thought it would be as good a time as any to get to a Genesis game. But what game to pick? I look back at all the videos I've done this season, and I saw that while I had a few sports titles in the list, football, baseball, volleyball, even billiards, but no basketball yet. So, as of the recording of this video, the NBA is currently in the second round of the playoffs, so I figured now was as good a time as any to open that window into history and take a look back at what the NBA was like 30 years ago, back when Utah and Denver and Atlanta were paper tigers capable of making the playoffs but ultimately just serving as a warm-up for teams that actually had a chance to win the finals. It's almost like nothing has changed over the last 30 years. And before I get angry messages from Nuggets and Hawks fans, hey, the Lakers suck this year, I was rooting for both of you, and you both let me down. All joking aside, this week's video is NBA All-Star Challenge, which was released in February of 1993 from Flying Edge, who was probably better known to most gamers as Acclaim. More on that in a minute. NBA All-Star Challenge, despite its name, is not what you consider a traditional NBA basketball game, and instead focuses more on various individual competitions. And I'm okay with that. We've got plenty of traditional basketball games on the console already, assuming NBA All-Star Challenge is actually good, that is. Is it? Well, I'll find out shortly, but first a look at the package. And this is NBA All-Star Challenge for the Genesis. This particular copy has held up really well over the years, and looks almost new, complete with intact hang tab at the top. I love to see that. There was some shrink wrap on that, and that's what it would look like hanging up in an electronics boutique in 1993. NBA All-Star Challenge isn't a terribly common game. I wouldn't say it's rare, and it's certainly not valuable, only going for about $8 complete on price charting as of the making of this video, but it's also not something you see all the time, especially in complete form. I mention this because I wasn't even aware of its existence, at least on the Genesis anyway. I was always more familiar with the Game Boy version. But then I came across this pretty unique cover at a local shop. As it was released in early 1993, it came out before Sega had standardized their cover formatting for the first and third-party titles, with the familiar red band on the side. To me, that's a great thing, because this is actually some decent artwork, and having less real estate on the cover due to the red band would have diminished what they were able to do here. The logo at the top is basic, but looks nice and stands out top and center, with the officially licensed NBA logo tucked in right beside it. And if having that logo there wasn't good enough, there's also the inclusion of the hologram down below just as well, just to emphasize that it is an officially licensed item.
Beyond that, though, they were able to squeeze in 6 of the larger stars that appear in the game, and they gave each of their own colored aura, so to speak, to really make the pictures pop. And of course, this is all overlaid on a giant basketball in the background. Whether this game is any good or not, Acclaim's marketing team was at least on point here, trying to sell the game. One final note about the cover: while I certainly am not going to disparage any of these players or their importance to the history of the NBA, I find it interesting that as of the release of this game, this assortment of players had won a grand total of 0 NBA championships, and if Michael Jordan hadn't briefly retired or been suspended, depending on who you talk to, it's possible that Clyde and Hakeem never would have. Again, all great players, but when you have champions like Larry Bird, Isaiah Thomas, James Worthy, and Michael freaking Jordan in your game, and you don't put them on the cover, it's a little weird. Flipping over the back, and they've got a bit artistic with the rear cover as well, with 2 normal screenshots, and then a few custom cut images from the game, and finally some headshots of the players at the bottom. I like what they were thinking here, but these blown up shots are a tad blurry, not really what you want when you're trying to show detail. The flavor text at the top is solid. I like how they specifically called out the different game modes that were included, and that final stinger, "Don't be denied, take the NBA All-Star Challenge," has got some pop to it. Opening the package up, and while the cartridge label is a little faded, the manual is in near mint condition. I think that's because the manual is made out of high-quality paper stock. The pages are pretty thick and don't bend easily. Just like the front and rear cover, the manual has solid graphic design as well, and there are tons of screenshots from the game, and real pictures of the players included, to keep things from getting too dry. And I especially like the middle section that identifies all the players in the game. Gotta love that inclusion of Hershey Hawkins. NBA All-Star Challenge is a game that's simple enough to where you could probably get by without the manual, so I appreciate all the effort that they put into this. Okay, that's the really good looking package, but let's just see if this is one of those times when you shouldn't judge something by its cover. NBA All-Star Challenge, in its simplest terms, is a basketball game that features real NBA players, competing in various different challenges. Pretty self-explanatory. However, what's not necessarily spelled out in that title is which players are included in the game. The rear cover flavor text starts out with the line, "Jam at home with 27 of the hottest NBA All-Stars." Well, if you weren't familiar with the status of the NBA around 1992 or 1993, that number might sound oddly arbitrary. However, it's actually quite simple. At the time, the NBA consisted of 27 teams, and the designers of the game decided, well, we've paid for this NBA license, we should probably use it to represent all of the teams to try to appeal to all the different fans out there. And that's not necessarily a bad idea, because for instance, if you're from Portland and you're a fan of the Trailblazers, and the Blazers aren't included in the game, you may not be interested in buying said game. The problem is not all teams have all-stars playing for them, as certain NBA franchises have tendencies to ebb and flow between success and failure, and oftentimes when teams are going through those, I'll be nice and say rebuilding periods, there may be years when there's no one on the team that's worth a damn, much less an all-star. This was especially true for that 92-93 season, which featured 4 franchises that had existed for less than 5 years at that point: the Charlotte Hornets, Miami Heat, Minnesota Timberwolves, and Orlando Magic. The end result is a game roster that has some pretty questionable choices, and the fact that it's named NBA All-Star Challenge is a misnomer at best, completely misleading and disingenuous at worst. Again, I understand why they included players from all 27 teams, but if a good portion of your player roster isn't actually All-Stars, you gotta change that title. As far as the player roster goes, there's definitely some interesting stuff going on. For one, I mentioned when discussing the cover that Michael Jordan was in the game, and he is. He's the representative for the Chicago Bulls, as he should be, and I'm still shocked that that isn't mentioned anywhere outside the manual. Keep in mind, Michael Jordan made his 9th straight All-Star appearance in that 1992-93 season, and the Bulls would go on to win their 3rd straight championship. In fact, his appearance at all in NBA All-Star Challenge is a bit of an oddity, as shortly after the release of the game, Jordan would buy his naming rights from the NBA and would not appear in NBA licensed games afterwards unless the publisher specifically obtained those rights directly from Jordan, essentially ending Jordan appearing in NBA games while being an active player. While it's cool that Jordan made one of his last appearances of the era in NBA All-Star Challenge, we've also got to talk that some of these more questionable choices made by the developers as well. Most times when sports games are released, their rosters are based on the last completed season, which for NBA All-Star Challenge would be the 1991-92 season, just so the players can have consistent ratings. However, Charles Barkley represents the Phoenix Suns even though he was still in the middle of his first season with the team at the time, and 91-92 was his last season with the 76ers. Bernard King represents the Washington Bullets, even though he didn't play in the 91-92 season at all due to injury, and by the time the game was released, he had spent the current season with the Nets. And the strangest choice I noticed was that Larry Bird had retired following the 91-92 season, so he had been out of the league for almost a full season by the game's release, so I'm not even clear how they had the rights to put him in the game. These choices, combined with other questionable choices for the expansion teams, for instance, Rony Seikaly over Glenn Rice, Scott Skiles over Nick Anderson, or Shaquille freaking O'Neal, Tony Campbell for the Timberwolves, even though he was a New York Knick for almost a full season when the game was released, and most egregiously, J.R. Reed over pretty much anyone on the Charlotte Hornets, really made me question where anyone at Beam Software or Acclaim had ever even actually watched an NBA game before designing it. I get that there's lead time when creating a video game, but they knew who was and wasn't on what team when they starting the 92-93 season, as evidenced by Charles Barkley representing the Suns, so this uneducated at best approach I can only explain by assuming the developer's mindset was, it's for kids, they're dumb and don't know any better. Insulting, to say the least. But if you thought the insults ended there, well, in the words of the immortal Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend. Let's talk about the available gameplay modes for a second. NBA All-Star Challenge purports to include 5 different gameplay modes: one-on-one, horse, free throw contest, 3-point challenge, and finally the NBA All-Star Tournament. At first you might think, oh, that sounds cool. Seems like there's some variety there. And to be honest, I do like the inclusion of horse and 3-point challenge modes. Or at least the idea of those 2 modes anyway. 3-point challenge is my favorite event every year on NBA All-Star Saturday Night, and horse is a solid 2-player game that probably everyone who's ever played basketball has played at least once. But then, free throw contest? Really? Was watching the end-line paint dry on a court not an option? Who thought this was a good idea? And then, one-on-one is simply a single-game version of NBA All-Star Tournament, so before even attempting any of the game modes, they're already playing fast and loose with the available content, in yet another bad sign. I know I already dragged the free throw contest, but I figured I should cover it briefly just because it's worse than being boring. It's spectacularly bad. In most other, sane basketball games, if there's an option for shooting free throws, there's usually some sort of meter, and it all comes down to timing, with worse free throw shooters being more difficult to control. Beam Software took a different approach here, and instead of having a meter, there's a drunken cursor that moves up and down and left and right around the rim. According to the manual, you can control that cursor by using the D-pad, but at best, with a good free throw shooter, you might be able to slightly alter the cursor's trajectory to help aim your shot. But if you choose someone like Dikembe Mutombo, good luck. Thankfully, there's not much here, so we can move on quickly. Next is Horse. Horse should be a really fun game with some back and forth between the players. And it's probably okay in 2-player mode, as both players will have to deal with the game's questionable shot control scheme. However, in single-player mode, even if you pick a good shooter, you probably will lose. One of my rounds I shot against Sean Kemp, and while I'm certainly not ignorant enough to say that all Kemp could do is dunk, he was making shots that I never saw him make in games. From 91 to 93, Kemp took 7 3-pointers and missed all of them. And yet, when the computer controls him, he's lighting it up from deep. A missed opportunity in single-player mode, to be sure. Moving on, there's the 1-on-1 and NBA All-Star Tournament modes. As mentioned, both feature the same type of gameplay, with it being a 1-on-1 events on a half court, with the goal being to be the first to either a set score or have the highest score at a time limit. And to their credit, they at least had some options in there for allowing you to set just how long a game you want to play, although also to think that this was pretty much the least they could do aside from doing nothing at all, so I'm not exactly sure how much credit that should be worth. The 1-on-1 gameplay is very simple, with the A button being used to jump and then shoot, the B button being used to attempt steals, and the C button being used to jump and then dunk if the player is close to the basket. All pretty straightforward, right? Well, there's a few issues. One, even in the easiest difficulty, the computer has a tendency to rip the ball away from you and run straight to the basket for a cheap hoop. And of course, it's not quite so easy for the player to do that. Two, that dunk button is completely useless. Just forget it exists. Even as playing as someone like Jordan, you'll have problems trying to score that way. And three, just like in horse mode, the computer will always be the better shooter than you, so it's best to just shoot everything from the lane and hope the computer misses a shot or two. Like in horse mode, these issues are minimized when playing against a human since it's a level playing field, but it just feels amazingly primitive. The All-Star Tournament is the game's main mode, and even it can't escape some serious goofiness. It's an 8-player tournament and you get to choose all the competitors, which is nice. However, in something that I've never run into in a sports game, at least that I can remember, the computer is unable to sim a game against itself. This means that win or lose, you're playing every game in every round of the tournament. You can technically lose every game in the tournament and still see the end scene of a player winning the tournament, followed by a brief credit screen before everything starts again. I'm not even sure what to say here, but just based on this and everything else, the game feels like an unfinished demo, where Acclaim was like, you know what, just release it. We want it on the market before NBA Jam hits the arcades. It's hard for me to imagine anyone playtesting this and thinking it was good enough to sell. I can only imagine it was a sunk cost issue, where they'd paid for the NBA licensing and hell or high water, we're going to make some of that money back. The only redeeming game mode is the 3-point contest. It at least works somewhat as you would expect, with an accurate representation of one round of the contest back in 1993, i.e. just 5 racks of balls with a money ball in each. But, as I stated, it's just a brief one-on-one event, not a tournament, and after the match is decided, you can choose to have a rematch or choose players again. The shooting is still a bit on the sensitive side when it comes to timing, but once you pick up the rhythm, you can probably do pretty well. I just go back to what I said earlier, and that some of the game just as a whole feels like it's just enough to qualify for doing what it says, and that even the 3-point contest could have been better had it had more options, like maybe adding a tournament mode, or keeping track of high scores, or I don't know, anything. The graphics are just as blah as the rest of the experience. Team logos and digitized pictures of the players are included, and that's great for static menus, but the court experience is pretty blah. Most players are indistinguishable from one another, other than the uniform that they're wearing, and the crowd in the background is unchanging, with just a few frames of animation to show cheering. I did like how the floor animated as you moved across it, with how the wood texture shifted, and they at least had the lane set to be a color matching your player's team, but really, those things only stand out because of how poor the rest of the game is, and it's odd to see something competent. Interestingly, the Super Nintendo version doesn't look much better on the whole, but it does have an interesting reflection feature in the court that's missing from the Genesis version, and it's just really odd that both versions appear to have more work put into how the court animates than any other aspect of the game. Finally, because I've already put way more into this review than this game deserves, I'll describe the game's sound as adequate. not good and not bad, but serviceable. The few bits of music that are used in the menus all sound fine, and then the effects used during gameplay are okay, with a few lines of speech included for the occasional foul call. The crowd noise is a bit lazy, but I suppose at least they included both cheering and booing if you listen close. NBA All-Star Challenge is definitely one of the more bizarre games I've reviewed over the last 155 episodes of Zilog and Moto, mainly because I'm not really certain why it exists. It's not a good game by any stretch of the imagination, and even when the game flashes a brief semblance of something good, like the 3-point challenge, even that seems quick and dirty versus a fully fleshed out product. After playing it, it's no wonder that it's not a game that I see very often complete, or mentioned much at all, because it might be the worst basketball game on the Genesis. It's definitely in contention anyway. As a result, and I went back and forth on this briefly, but I've got no choice to award this a total bomb. Normally, even bad games, if functional, I'll give at least 1 star, but just due to the litany of issues and half-bakedness of this game, it doesn't even deserve that. It should be a footnote in history due to Michael Jordan appearing in the game, and nothing more.
And that was NBA All-Star Challenge for the Genesis. As much as I enjoy this era of the NBA, as it's what I grew up with, this game is an extremely poor representation of that era, and looks even worse with the fact that NBA Jam was literally just about to debut in the arcades. And honestly, if I was the NBA, I would have been somewhat pissed that they were represented this way, at least when I wasn't busy counting the money from the license fees. Tune in next week as I have a very special video lined up that I've had my eyes on for about a month now. Longer than that, really, because I first ordered one of the games for it from Greece back in March, and it got lost, and I had to order another copy from France. What's that? Yes, I did say games plural, as the next episode will cover not 1, not 2, but 3 games. And no, I'm not cheating, there's a good reason why they are all being discussed in the same video. Sometimes holy grails require special treatment. Remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.